Hello and welcome to another video on Illustrator. In this one I'm going to show you how to make polar arrays and patterns based on circles, concentric circles, how to use the rotate tool, making some basic guides to help you make those patterns, rotating the guides and looking at the polar grid tool and some of the problems that you might have in doing that, where you have patterns that don't line up exactly, making some guides, over and underlapping, so the stacking of objects and how you might correct that, looking at different effects that you can apply to the stroke while you're doing it, and then to correct the over and underlap using the pen tool. So patterns like this, gouache patterns, you might see these on currency. To make these inside of Illustrator, it's not super difficult. This one, it's just a hexagon. Okay, so you can see here I've got a hexagon and a square in here, and they are just rotated and copied a couple of hundred times. So how do you make those? Well, it's fairly straightforward. I'm just going to zoom into the artboard below here, and I'm going to use the polygon tool, and I'm going to click and drag and make a hexagon. With the hexagon, I'm going to copy it and rotate it around a couple of times. To copy and rotate, you're going to use the rotate tool. So OR is the shortcut for the rotate tool. And when you start in the rotate tool, it picks up the center point from whatever object you're using. Now, if you don't want to rotate it about the center, you can change that, but sometimes you might just want to rotate your object about the center. OR for rotate. And then the first left click that you do will pick up a new center point, the fulcrum point for this rotation. So if I want to rotate this object, click and drag using the left mouse button. If I just click and drag without pressing anything else, it will rotate the object. If I click and drag and hold down the Alt or Option key, you'll notice that the cursor changes from a black arrow to a black and a white arrow, meaning I'm making a copy. And then I can either right click and choose transform again, or the shortcut is Control D or Command D on a Mac, and then I can copy that a few more times. And then if I have stacked my objects so that they don't match exactly, so not a repeating pattern of 6 or 4 or 12, but that they're slightly out of sync with each other, I can then copy that a couple of hundred times and make some interesting patterns. Now be aware that some of you on slightly lower spec laptops, these will have a massive impact on your computer. Okay, so just be aware of that. I'm just going to delete that, and it doesn't matter how many shapes you have when you're drawing these type repeat patterns. So I could have, you know, a hexagon and a square. I could have a triangle in there as well. So when you're drawing with the polygon tool, start drawing and use the up or down arrow keys on your keypad to add and remove numbers of sides of your objects. So I can then position this the way I see fit. So something like that maybe. And then just pick them up, or for rotate, it's going to find the center from the objects that you have. Just pick a new center point. At this point, it would be important to consider where you're going to align these up with each other. So if I wanted to align this corner to match maybe this edge over here, I can pick it up using that anchor point as a reference. And then as I swing it around, it's going to tell me when that intersects with another point on the object. And again, the black arrow means that I'm just rotating it. And if I hold down the Alt or Option key, it's going to make a copy. And then I can choose whether I repeat that again. So Command D, Control D, and then step and repeat it. And you can get some really unusual and really interesting symmetrical or semi-symmetrical patterns for this. And you can keep on repeating it a number of times to get the kind of the overlap that you're looking for. You could also look at these and say, oh, all the paths, all the strokes are all uniform. Maybe if they had different weights to these, so you could apply a slightly different stroke weight to different parts of the pattern and see how that affects things. So you could make them kind of recede toward the center or expand towards the center. Again, or for rotate, center the rotation, start the rotation, hold Alt or Option to make a copy, and then Control D or Command D to make a step and repeat from that. So you can see you can have quite a lot of fun with these. You can also use non-uniform strokes as well. So if you wanted these to be a lot more like galoshes on currency and so on, you could use, say, something like the curvature tool or the pen tool and draw yourself some wavy line patterns. And then change the stroke profile from uniform to non-uniform, and then maybe increase the stroke size a little bit so that you can see the effect of that. And then pick it up, or for rotate, pick a central rotation point, hold down the Alt or Option key to copy it, and then repeat. And you'll get some really unusual kind of spirograph like patterns. Sometimes you're going to get really unusual, unexpected results, and maybe just before it starts to form a circle inside itself, that might be something that you find interesting and want to work with. And when you're making these polar patterns, you will want to have some sort of guideline to work with. So if I'm just working with a single shape and I want to make a 6-sided shape or an 8-sided shape from this, that's fairly easy. So you can just hold down or to make the rotation. Doesn't really matter where you're clicking in that case, because you can hold the Shift key and that will force Illustrator to lock it at 45 or 90 degrees. So if you just want to make a 4-sided pattern, you can just hold down the Shift key while you're rotating it and the Alt key, and then let go and then Control D. And in this case, I'll get 8 shapes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If I want to make kind of other numbers from these, this is where I would need to use some guidelines to make these. Okay, so I'm just going to go up here. You can see in this case I made a 6-sided shape, and to do that I drew in some guidelines. So I brought these in from the side. Now, to make this a little bit easier without these kind of overlapping, I just put these on another layer so that I could turn that on and off. And when you're working with guidelines, this might be something for you to really consider, to put your guidelines on a separate layer, because they can interfere. If you've got multiple artboards and you're making multiple shapes and so on, they can start to get in the way. As you can see, I just added in a new artboard. These are not like in InDesign where you can clip these to the to your sheet of paper, your page size. These are going to extend on for the full size of your space that you're working with. Okay, so just bear that in mind. So if I wanted to make something that aligns up and I'm going to use the center point, what I can do is I can just click and drag in a guideline from one edge and another one from another edge. And if I want to find the exact center of my sheet or what I'm working on, I can use the Align tool palette. So Shift F7 will find that. Okay, and then when you want to align it, you want to align to the artboard. Pick up your 2 objects or one guideline at a time. I can center it this direction and center the other one in the other direction, so it's centered horizontally and vertically. And because I'm selected on this layer, I can lock those and not worry about accidentally moving them and so on. Now, again, I can just draw my shape. So I need to make sure I'm on a layer that I can work on. Draw my shape. I can click and move this around and line it up with the edge of my object. If I'm thinking I want this pattern to have maybe a small gap towards the center, or I could be thinking that I want to make, you know, a sunburst style pattern and so on. And I will just give this a fill with a color so it makes it a little bit easier to look at and see. Maybe take away the stroke on this one. So again, or for rotate, the guidelines the rotation tool will look for you to either hit on a guideline or an intersection, or for example an anchor point and so on. So I can find that intersection and then pick up a relationship to the object. So if I wanted this to be 4 sides, I can rotate this around and match that guideline, and again holding the Alt or Option key will make that copy, and then drop that down, and then Control D, Command D to step and repeat it. Now if I want to draw something which is at a different angle to these, it is possible to rotate the guidelines. So if I unlock this, I can select the guideline and then I can rotate it. So if I'm looking for a particular angle, so maybe 30 degrees, just bear in mind that these are the world positions for your object. So depending on where you are drawing inside of your space, so inside of all of this space, these are the relative positions for these. Okay, so even though I can rotate this, so let's choose here about at center and 30 degrees, it's going to rotate it about the center point here. It's still at 30 degrees, so I can click and drag that over. It's not going to change the angle. It's going to look at aligning it up with different objects. So again, I might want to bring down another guideline now from the top edge and bring that into the center, line that up to my artboard in the center, and now I can pick this guideline up, and just like the rotate tool, these want to find those intersection points. So now I can have this rotate at 30 degrees. Again, I'm going to lock that so that I can turn that on and off and see the work that I want to create with this, rather than seeing the guidelines maybe interfering with it. So, or for rotate, pick up the center of the rotation, hold Alt so that I'm making a copy, and grab on the anchor point, and then I can drop it on that guideline. And now I can make a 6-sided shape and star from that. And it really doesn't matter what your shape is or however many parts or components that you've got. It's the guidelines and working out the kind of the maths of your shapes and so on, how many times it's going to repeat. That's the actual hard part from this. You could make, overlapping shapes. So you could look at that. You could use the pathfinder tools and unite those together if you were thinking about making thunderbolts or those kind of shapes, or lightning bolts. You could look at using transparency and changing the opacity, so you can bring these down so that as they stack on top of each other, you get more and more overlapping and concentration of that color. In this case, we've only got a limited number, so maybe around 70% is fine. So again, or for rotate, pick up the center of the rotation, grab some relationship to the object, hold Alt or Option to make a copy, and then repeat it. And that allows you to make some really, really simple but quite interesting patterns fairly rapidly. Now, if you wanted to do, instead of a star, more of a sunburst like pattern, you'd be thinking about maybe bringing this down in the other direction, or just grabbing this and rotating it around, and then picking those up. Or for rotate, pick the intersection point. You can still use the anchor point here, hold the Alt key to make a copy, and then repeat that, and then you get something like that. And if you want them to be closer, you just need to choose an increased number for the rotation. So what are the kind of the quick and easy ways that you can make those numbers and those rotations? Well, Illustrator has a really great grid making tools for doing these. So I'm just going to add in another artboard just down below this one. I'm just going to make that A3 and drop it there. Okay, so you have these grid making tools. So under the line segment, you have different grid making and drawing tools. So you have the polar grid tool. If I just click and drag, it's going to draw it corner to corner. So just like any of the other shape tools, so the circle, ellipse, square, rectangle, and so on. If I hold the Shift key, it's going to constrain those proportions. So instead of drawing an ellipse, it's going to draw a circle. And while I'm holding down the left mouse button, if I press the up and down key on my cursor, I can choose to add in more and less concentric circles. So up will add in more concentric circles, down will remove those, left and right will change the numbers of radial lines on it. So I can go from 3, 4, 5. I can go to 0 if I just want a bunch of radiating circles and so on. And likewise, I just reduce these down. So on. And then I can go back and hold the shift key to turn this into a perfect circle. So this will give me my shape like this. Now, it's a drawing of a shape. It's not like the guidelines that you drag in from the side. So this can hold a stroke and a fill, and it is a group. So you can go back inside and start to edit away the shapes and recolor those and so on. And for this reason, again, it would be very helpful for you to draw this on a background layer or a layer that you're going to turn on and off. Now, you can also draw this by clicking on it and clicking on your workspace. So double click onto your workspace, and this will bring up the polar grid tool. So if you want this grid to be exactly 100 mil in width and height, how many concentric lines, so the radiating lines, and how many of those that you're looking for, you have this option of skewing, and I'm going to show you how to do that visually, because percentage wise these might not make the most sense to you. So we'll make a radiating line of, say, I've done it again. I want to change the number of radiating lines, so the spokes coming from this, and I'm going to choose OK on that, and that will draw my shape. I can also, while drawing the tool, before I start, hold down the Alt or Option key and draw it from a center point. So I can use all the same settings, but this time, instead of drawing it from the corner up here, corner to corner, it's going to pick up the center of the object. Okay. Now, you can, like I said, skew these. And what does that mean? Well, you can change the percentage value of where these stack up with each other. So I'm going to draw this one on this layer and go back into the polar grid tool and just make sure I have the layer on and start drawing it. And now using the X and C, you can change the percentage rhythm from the distance between these. So if I add in some more lines, you can see how they get tighter and closer together towards the center when I use X, and when I use C, I can undo that and start to skew them the opposite direction where they get tighter towards the outside. Now, you can use these to make some really interesting optical illusions, but you can also use this to make true spirals, a spiral that tapers down from the outside towards the center. If I want to skew the radiating spoke lines, it's F and V, so I can change these how they work, and F will skew them in one direction and V will skew it or undo it in the other direction. So if I'm looking to make kind of a spiralized form, I'll just drop that there for a second. I'm going to lock it, and if I wanted to make a kind of Fibonacci type spiral object, I can use my curvature tool and hit at the intersection point from these and start to spiral it outwards, because Illustrator has a spiral tool, but it's not a spiral where it's going to infinitely small in the center. It's kind of more like a corbette where it's a parallel spiral. Okay, and then with that, you can use your polar array to figure out all the spacing for these, so you can figure out exactly what you're looking for. So if you're looking to make a shape with 6 spokes on it, 6 radiating lines on it, go into the polar grid tool. You can either use the Alt to figure out the center, or use some guidelines on the center of your page, or draw it corner to corner. And I want this to be 150 mil by 150, and it's going to have maybe 3 concentric dividers and 5 spoke lines, or maybe we'll make this one more a little bit more interesting, a 7-sided shape. So choose OK. Oh, I forgot to undo the skew, so I'll just undo that and redraw it and change the skew to 0 and 0 and then draw my shape. So now I have something that I can use to align up my objects with. So get rid of this one. Again, I can use the align tool and line this up with my artboard so it's perfectly in the center. Again, pick this up, Control X to cut it out, and then go on to my background layer and then edit paste in place. So it pastes it into the exact same place that it's come from. Lock that, and now I have some really neat guides to make my shape. So if I go back up and just take maybe a copy of one of these and copy down to this artboard and just paste, and then I can line this up with parts of my object. So I could be thinking about lining it up with the edge or in between, whichever makes more sense to you. In this case, I'm going to rotate this around and line it up from the bottom edge so that you can see how it lines up with those spokes exactly. And I'm just going to take away that guideline so it doesn't interfere visually with what we're doing, and just move this away and make sure that it is hitting that guideline that we're going to use exactly. So I could then pick this up, or for rotate, grab the center, and it's going to tell you when you're hitting that anchor point. Again, pick some relationship to the object. In this case, I want this anchor point here. Hold down the Alt key, and then you can step and repeat it and have it match your pattern. So Illustrator is working out all of those angles for you, and then you can make your 7-sided or however many sided shape just using the polar grid to align those up. Likewise, you could use the polar grid to align up other parts of your pattern. So if you were looking to make some other triangles, match the width of or the spacing for some of these, so just hold the Alt key and take a copy of that, and then I can align this up with the intersection or the anchor from that one. Likewise, I can take another copy and start to line these up more and more with each other. And then just do my array again, and I will get these really neat shape forms. Now, if you have something like this, so you've made a polar array from a square or some other shape and they are overlapping and underlapping, I'm just going to pop in another artboard in here so you can see this maybe a little bit easier. And I'm just going to draw a square and maybe swap that back to black and white, and then make a small array from this. So again, or for rotate tool, pick the center and then some arrangement or relationship to the object. Hold down the Alt key to make a copy of that and drop it there, and then Control D, Command D to step and repeat. So I go all the way around, and then this happens where the stack of objects starts to hit on top of itself. Now I can try to rearrange, so send it to the back, send it maybe under this one, but it's still going to have an over and underlapping kind of issue to this. So I'm just going to reduce the number of pieces in this to make it a little bit easier and quicker for you to see the effect of what I'm doing. And just rotate, Alt to make a copy, and then just step and repeat. So you can see we've got this over and underlap. Now, if they match perfectly, it would make probably even more sense. So why don't I make that with maybe 6 or 8 on that. So something like that. So it's a little bit easier for you to see. So you can see that the problem one that we're having is just here. These are all fine. These are over and over and over and over. And then this one wants to be around this shape. So the easiest way that I can think of to do these would be to just edit the pathway to cut this out around this object. So use the pen tool, and when you overlap these, it's going to show you where that intersection is. So it's looking at here. And then what I can do is I can go in and take that single anchor point here and pull that back to match the overlap here. And then I get all the appearance that the pattern is stacking over and under, except this one last piece here is slightly cut out. And that's how you can repair a pattern like that fairly quickly and easily. Now, you can do these repeat patterns with changing the stroke, adding dots and dashes or anything like that. That's stylistic changes to it. Okay, thank you.